which I know we see a lot as firms are merging or combining, you also end up with different opinions about the future of the firm. And that adds another dynamic which can slow decision-making down, or at least make it harder for firms to align on a future outcome, which gives confidence for building maybe more sustained investments in talent, infrastructure, long-term projects, and things become more like, what can we get done this month, this week, rather than what is the right strategy for the firm over the next 2 to 3 years.
Rise Up with Rise Growth Partners. Joe Duran and the Rise team share hard-won lessons from building top wealth management firms, showing you what it takes to create a lighthouse brand that inspires clients, attracts talent, and fuels growth.
Welcome back to Rise Up with Rise Growth Partners. I'm Jennifer Geoghegan, Chief Marketing Officer here at Rise. And I'm here today with Brian Shenson, our Chief Operating Officer. Welcome, Brian. Great to have you here.
Thanks, Jennifer. Excited to be a part of this conversation today.
Yeah, this will be fun. So Brian, in addition to running the day-to-day at Rise, he works a lot with our firms and has worked for many years in the industry, helping firms on projects that help them scale, provide additional value to their clients and their advisors, working on platform initiatives, digital, all things technology, platform, and client experience enhancements for the firms. Did I sum it up correctly?
Yeah, you did very well. It's a broad topic as the platform needs for firms have grown so much over the last couple of decades. I got my start just building and delivering technology solutions for advisors, and along the way, you've seen an entire ecosystem of solution providers show up to support this incredible industry.
Yeah, it's truly amazing, the number of solutions out there. I remember when there was just a handful of choices, and now it's just amazing, the explosion of choices, which can be overwhelming for firms. So let's start with, the pain points that we often see as we think about firms evolving. What do you find happens when they come to you and say, like, things used to work really well and they're starting to break? We're starting to feel pain points. What's typically the cause?
I think the cause is, advisory firms are incredibly good at growing. Successful ones really know how to grow, and the growth is really driven from the advisors and the success of the advisors developing those relationships they already have or building new relationships. And it's been my experience watching this happen, Jennifer, that a lot of times the organizational strength of supporting those advisors tends to lag behind the growth. That advisors are carrying a huge level of responsibility in driving that growth. They're certainly leaning into their client service staff to support great outcomes for clients. But oftentimes the organizations tend to be later than you might expect or want to invest in centralized infrastructure or operational support to support the scale and sustainability of the entire business. So there's a little bit of a lag factor, and it tends to be challenging for advisory-led firms to recognize the importance of professional management because they are so accustomed to it being an advisor-led outcome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you next. Is it a people problem? I feel like some firms think it's a tooling problem, but I hear you saying it might be more of investing in additional specialized talent. Is that right?
Yeah, specialized talent, because I think two things matter. One is the specialized talent can really optimize the tools and technology for the team. I think advisors have a tendency to know what they want, but they don't know how to actually accomplish it. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, the tools are not always perfect, but it's the people's use of the tools that actually needs to be solved. Mm-hmm. And if you don't have specialty knowledge or specialty focus on supporting advisors and using the tools, we see this time and time again. Everyone's got all the fancy capabilities, but they're not getting leverage from those capabilities because the reality is advisors are very busy doing their job of supporting clients and building relationships. And it's not their top priority, nor should it be, to spend all day learning how to optimize their use of a CRM, learn all the nooks and crannies of a portfolio management system. And so there's a heavy need to invest in that specialized expertise to help bring advisors to what they need to be doing in those tools. And really, quite frankly, getting leverage from the specialized staff to carry the weight in sustaining and maintaining the quality of that experience for the advisors. Mm-hmm. As we all know, the advisor is the most precious asset in these firms, but they need to be enabled with capability, tooling, and support to be at the top of their license in working with clients.
Right. And behind all that is their limited time. There's
Their
only so
limited
many hours in the day, and ideally they're spending that with clients or prospects.
Yeah. And I think the vendor community is a little bit at fault here too, because they make it all seem so easy, right? I mean, it's fancy to talk about capabilities. You can run very fancy demos. I've seen countless, pitch meetings to advisors who get very excited about, oh, I want that capability, but they don't have an appreciation for the effort required to set it up, train the organization, customize it to a certain degree so it matches the way that that firm wants to deliver that experience. And a lot of projects, as I'm sure we'll talk about today, tend to fall down because of the planning and preparation and change management that is really important for any business infrastructure change, but particularly for advisors who are really trying to stay in front of clients and in the field.
Yeah. So let's get a little deeper into how this shows up in the different stages. I think about the life cycle of the firm. Often they start out founder-led or multi-founder-led for many years until they start evolving to those higher levels and hopefully ultimately become a well-functioning enterprise. What changes as they go through that evolution? Where do they feel the pain points as they start evolving out of that advisor-led to enterprise model?
Yeah, in some ways, it almost starts at the very genesis of these firms. Jennifer, as you know, a lot of these founder-led firms, they oftentimes start with an advisor and a support person or a couple of support people, maybe one who's supporting the advisor, one who is set up to support the office, sort of the office manager, receptionist, who handles kind of front of the house experience. They almost become accidental operations leaders because they're now in the middle of running many aspects of the business that advisors are either not interested in being involved in intimately or don't have time to be involved in. And more of the burden of those jobs falls on what I kind of consider the accidental operations person who happen to be just in the job, supporting an individual or a small team. And then before they know it, as the firm is growing, they end up with all these jobs they never thought they'd have. Like, oh, now they're responsible for technology decisions. Now they're responsible for making sure that bills get out on time. Now they're responsible for making sure reporting is done properly.
I'm laughing because often the marketer
is also the marketing team now.
Also an accidental marketer. Oh, I get an email communication out a few times and then I become the on-staff marketer.
I'm running the event now. I'm running the marketing list. And it's all done by, I think, well-intentioned individuals who are doing their best to serve the needs of the organization, but they've never been in those positions before functionally, or maybe they have, but not all of them. They have very little access to training or time to develop their own skills in those functions because the firm is growing and typically very busy. And I think another point, Jennifer, which we know is challenging, is a lot of these firms are isolated from each other. They don't even have people to share ideas and experiences with until they become of size that they have the time and the resources to get outside the office, go to conferences, and network with their peers. So these individuals are, in some ways, the cog that runs the organization intimately, but they're actually under-experienced to fully deliver on the potential of the firm. Mm-hmm. And then as they grow beyond that, I think there's a trepidation to overinvest in that part of the business because advisors still perceive that as overhead, not revenue generating. And I think there becomes an inflection point when they start to recognize that these are assets of the firm rather than costs of the firm. But it takes a pretty mature organization who sees that there's a growth path to recognize that they need to make substantial investments in internal operations to support the success of the entire firm.
Yeah. And I think too, someone at a high enough level that they can paint the big picture and the destination, not just implement the next tool.
Yeah.
I feel like that often gets missed.
Vision setting is really important at certain stages. I think many firms come to that realization, unfortunately, a little too late. They still can get to a good vision, but then they have maybe engineered in certain areas, or they have to think about what do we have today that we either need to rethink or refactor or perhaps replace. And I think those are hard decisions for firms that are very busy and just trying to move forward with growth. The other factor here, Jennifer, is I know we see a lot as firms are merging or combining. You also end up with different opinions about the future of the firm. And that adds another dynamic which can slow decision-making down, or at least make it harder for firms to align on a future outcome, which gives confidence for building maybe more sustained investments in talent, infrastructure, long-term projects, and things become more like, what can we get done this month, this week, rather than what is the right strategy for the firm over the next 2 to 3 years.
Yes. And with that, this proliferation of tools at the firm with very low usage or effective usage. I don't know what the right term is for that, but often we hear firms say again and again, well, we have all these tools. So-and-so uses it extensively and it seems to work really well for this advisor. And then all these advisors are barely using the tools they even have. So therefore their conclusion is, well, we need to jump to the next tool, not spend the time training and developing the team member, which I often feel like could go beyond the advisor. So often it's just pointing to the advisor, but ideally there's a mini team around them who can carry out many of these tasks as well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, look, and I think you know this. I worked as a consultant for a number of years before joining Rise, and working with a lot of firms on how to navigate these problems. And oftentimes, firms would either come to this conclusion or we would advise them. Your most valuable hire to address some of those gaps is actually like a technology coach or an advisor coach who can actually just work one-on-one with advisors on how to actually optimize their experience around tools. It's almost a far better investment to put a person in the mix than just to assume that you jump from platform A to platform B that's going to solve all your problems. You actually just have the same problems on a new set of tools. So we love firms that think about like enablement of the advisor as a human experience in combination with technology. Now it's going to change radically as AI shows up and like the patterns of work are evolving rapidly. But in some ways that even makes it that much more important to put human capital into the right places to unlock the value of those technologies, automations, and advanced capabilities that are increasingly getting beyond the reach of what most advisors can even comprehend as possible.
So let's talk more about the rosy picture of when it works well. We've hit on a bunch of areas where firms have missteps. What does it look like when a firm is making that evolution from practice or multiple practices collaborating together to enterprise? What does it look like on the platform and technology infrastructure side? What leaders might be in place? Where might they start? What does it look like when it does go well?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of foundational points, and they kind of show up at different levels of scale and maturity. But I think some of the key points are, one, creating a separation of responsibility when you get to a certain scale between who owns and runs the platform choices and who are the users of the platform. So I think that's one of the first separations that starts to take place. Now, in that vein, these advisors still need high advocacy and opportunities to create voice of what they need and how they experience it. So committees or voice of advisor becomes a funnel of expectations into a team, but there's a separate and dedicated individual or set of individuals who are responsible for understanding those needs, translating that into projects and programs, and then providing oversight and management of those projects, but also with accountability back to the advisor constituents to say, where are we? How are we delivering on your needs? And what can you expect from us? So that's fundamental, I think, piece of infrastructure. Second would be a vision. Now, it may be hard to get there. Oftentimes it can be helpful to work with an independent consultant who can corral different opinions to help paint a picture of, we're here today, we want to be here in 3 to 5 years, and help advisory firms break down what is it going to take to get there? What are the gaps we need to close? That could be capability gaps. It could be talent gaps. It could be other training and investments in the talent to be successful.
Current team structure.
Exactly. So it's kind of like, what's the operating model to support that, and how do we understand what those evolution points are in terms of human talent and platform capabilities to move the organization along that vision, and recognize it's not a static vision. It has to be also nurtured and managed and reassessed at least annually. I think it's really constructive that firms say we have a 5-year plan, but we're going to revalidate it every year likely it will have only minor adjustments, but that's a lot easier than waking up 3 years later and realizing your plan is actually not what you're doing.
Yes. Love that. And I think,
yeah, well, I have one other thing I just want, no, it's okay. I think another thing that's really important is when you get to a certain level of scale, especially for firms with diverse advisors and diverse advisor expectations, it can be very helpful to kind of have a head of wealth management or a head of advisory or a head of client experience, someone who is ultimately the single leader who is accountable for understanding and assimilating the various points of view in the advisor ranks, managing that conversation at a senior executive level with the team that's responsible for executing and operations, and then having also accountability for enforcing and reinvigorating advisors to be aligned with the plan, because that feedback loop is essential. Otherwise, advisors will still do what advisors do, and there may be waste or redundancy in some of the outcomes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was going to add a couple things. The picture you're painting, I think, should be helpful to the viewers in that sometimes firms do set up these advisory committees or councils, and they come up with this long wish list, and then they assume that the person or the team's job is to tick through that list. And then there's frustration because they can only accomplish a few things and they're doing their best to prioritize, but there's no vision or plan that it's tied to that people understand. So I think you're making some really important points. The other thing that you made me think about was we haven't talked about M&A or recruiting additional talented advisors, but if you get a lot of the things right we're talking about, it just makes it so much easier to recruit talent to this well-defined platform and workflows. And then, of course, onboard and integrate them just makes it's just so much easier.
Yeah, couldn't agree more, Jennifer. And I think we see this on the other side too, which is around advisor retention, right? If you have a compelling platform and if you can demonstrate to the advisors in your ranks of where you're going, it not only helps, I think, bind them to committed to the brand and the relationships that they're building with that firm. Not all advisors are equitized and owners, so that's important to have alignment in terms of vision and capability for your clients. And it also, it does something that we all know is really important for the value of the firm, which is institutionalize those client relationships to the branded platform experience and not just the personal relationship with the advisor. Both are important, but I think firms, if they're thinking about building enterprise value, need to be very thoughtful about ensuring that client relationships are bound to the brand and the firm's platform, not just to the relationship with the advisor. And those visions can be helpful in cementing that vision and making sure that there's awareness as to what we're building for that client base.
Absolutely. Last question for you, Brian, for leadership team members who might be listening and feeling pain points right now. They're feeling frustration around the ability to execute. Where would you suggest they even start? What's the first step they should take?
Well, I think, and we see this even with client-based research, I think you got to actually just start by talking to your advisors in, I think, both qualitative and quantitative ways, depending on the size of your business, and creating that voice of the advisor, understand what's working well, what's not working well, get all the input. And then, as we've discussed, separate yourself from the noise and just think about it and discuss it as a leadership team. So you come to some conclusions that are hopefully actionable and sustainable, but not just we have a laundry list of things to do and we have to respond to everything. Like there is a discipline. I know we know this, like editing is almost as important as creating. You got to edit the list to get to what really matters most. And I think the other part of this is just being really direct. Like a few things can really move the needle here. And I think advisory firms need to recognize that the list of 70 projects or 15 projects is actually not the right thing to focus on. Identify the one or two things that can be really impactful, and also build credibility for the organization in getting things done. Because I think once advisors see that a firm can actually accomplish something, it builds momentum and commitment for the next project, and it allows firms to take on more complex, ambitious projects. So quick, easy wins build confidence and momentum for harder, more complicated initiatives.
I completely agree. And giving visibility to those wins, because it's easy for there to be a lot of negativity in a firm, can brew over time if you have a few advisors feeling like they're not being heard. These problems are never being addressed. But if you get just a couple of wins, as you're saying, and you communicate that, people start to rally around the next one and the next and the bigger vision.
Yeah. And there's typically, as I know we've experienced, a couple of individual advisors who are actually passionate about these topics. Mm-hmm. You can build small working teams around the work that doesn't burden the advisor with execution, but it makes them feel even more intimately involved in the work product. And they can not only help support the outcome, but they can evangelize the results to their colleagues in a way that is more authentic than operations or leadership just sending messages about what we got done. If it's really felt at the grassroots level, I think it creates even more momentum and confidence in the firm.
Perfect. Sounds great. And thank you for sharing with the audience. We hope you found this helpful today. We know it's a hot topic at many firms, but we'd also love to hear more about what's on your minds. What can we talk about that would be helpful for you as you work through getting to and excelling at that next stage of growth? So thanks again, Brian. We'll see you back here soon, I'm sure. And thank you all for watching Rise Up. Have a good one.
Thanks.